What's up, Packer people? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Please make sure to subscribe if you have not already. It literally takes 2 seconds. Just click the button. We're good to go. Appreciate you being here, though. And today I want to talk about 5 Packers that I am buying the hype on. We always get to some level of hype at this point in the season. The rookies are all, we get our first glimpse of the rookies, our first glimpse of the free agents, and we start to, get on the hype train for some of these players. And there's certain players that I'm maybe not believing the hype on. There's some players that I just need more time. I want to see them in training camp, but there are a handful of players that I am 100% buying the hype on. Even at this point, even though it was just OTAs, even though it was just mini camps, even though we have a long way to go, I do have a handful of players that I am all in on for this upcoming season. It is varying degrees. So we may have a player on this list who the hype is that they might be able to make the team, and I think that's true, and I think they can maybe even outperform that. There's other players on this list that the hype might be that they're ready to become an all-pro player, and I'm believing that. It's not to say that the two are equals, but in some way, shape, or form, the hype for these players is there, and I want to confirm it today. This doesn't mean, once again, that if a player is not on this list, that I'm not believing in the hype. So, for example, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Devontae Wyatt, you're not going to find those 3 players on this list. It's not to say that I don't believe the hype. It's just to say that I want a bit more time to kind of review them in training camp and see what they do in preseason and things like that. So I'm not quite there yet, but let me go through 5 players that I am believing the hype on for 2022, and I'm going to kick things off with TJ Slayton. So first and foremost, if TJ Slayton in spring practices catches Larry McCarron's eye, and he does an entire feature on Slayton and what he's been doing in mini camps and OTAs so far, that should tell you something already. And I do believe, just the focus that TJ Slayton has in these mini camps and OTAs so far has been noticeably different. And I think this is a bigger development than maybe we're even talking about at this point. He seems like he is going to be the true undisputed, starting nose tackle on this team. And if he can do that, and if he can do that at a high level, I'm not talking, Pro Bowl, all-pro level, but a really consistent starter as your true run-stuffing nose tackle, that takes so much pressure off of Kenny Clark. He can now be your 3 technique and do a variety of different stuff. You can use him more on passing downs. You can do so much different stuff with him where he doesn't have to be the guy constantly trying to eat double teams and just, wear down through the course of the season. But more importantly, I feel like Slayton can actually be a player here who's, helping the linebackers behind him in Devondre Campbell, in Kway Walker. And actually, if these edge rushers are starting to, funnel everyone back inside, that Slayton can be a space eater, a run stuffer, and maybe even be a little bit of a pass rusher. Now, I don't want to set the hype too high for any of these players, right? Because there's a long way to go, especially for a player like TJ Slayton. But there does very much seem to be a difference between 2021 TJ Slayton and 2022 TJ Slayton. There's only so much you can get out of down linemen, whether it's offensive line or defensive line, from these unpadded practices. But the fact that they're already trusting him with the number 1 team defense reps as that starting nose tackle leads me to believe that Green Bay also believes in the hype in TJ Slayton, and he is going to be at minimum a real rotational player for this team, and I think he has the ability to really help out in a variety of ways. So player number 1 that I am buying the hype on is TJ Slayton. Get ready for him to be a real legitimate player on this defense. And again, what level that means, whether that means solid rotational player or somebody who's really making an impact, will remain to be seen. But I do believe that he is going to make an impact on this team in some capacity. Number 2, of course, number 2 is on this list. You already know who I'm going to say, and that is Tyler Davis. Of course, I'm going to talk about Tyler Davis, right? But this is where we talk about varying degrees. Let's just think back a year, right? Like Tyler Davis is not on the Packers. Like he gets, claimed and added to the roster, a handful of weeks into the season. At that point, right? If you even said at that point that Tyler Davis would just be on the roster in 2022, that would be a win for a player in that capacity, right? There's no guarantees at that point. I know he was a 53-man roster player midway through the season last year, and he had a handful of snaps on offense, handful of snaps on special teams, but ultimately, like, you still have a long way to go. but we are now talking about Tyler Davis as potential TE1 up until the point where Robert Tonyan gets back. And even once he's back, I believe we do have the ability to see some really fun two tight end sets with both Tyler Davis and Robert Tonyan. Neither of them are going to be what I would consider like your ideal pass blocker, your ideal run blocker, but both of them can get by being effort blockers and doing just enough as blockers. Well, both of them also have the ability to get up the seam, do a little bit of run after the catch, be some red zone threats. So I believe that Tyler Davis is going to take that role by the horns and really make the most of it up until the point where Tonyan comes back, and then still be an impact player and still be in the rotation even once Tonyan does get back in the rotation. So with that tight end spot being, so interesting, you've got DeGuara, you've got, Mercedes Lewis, you've got Tyler Davis, you've got Robert Tonyan eventually, Dominique Daphne could play a role here. I do think that it's going to be Tyler Davis that ultimately plays that role, and that's a huge step. And oh, by the way, I expect him to be one of the key stalwarts on this Rich Bisaccia special teams as well. So you're talking about a player who, you didn't even know you were going to get anything out of a season ago, and now could be your starting tight end week 1, could be a core special teams player for you. I am buying the hype on Tyler Davis. Now, I don't know, again, if that means, 40 catches for, 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, or if that means, 15 catches for 150 yards and maybe a touchdown, but also playing a lot on special teams. I'm not sure what that level is. And I'm not saying like hype Tyler Davis up where you should be drafting him as your T1 in fantasy or anything like that, but I'm hyping him up enough to say, I believe that he's going to have a real role within this offense. I believe he's going to have a real role within the special teams. And that's not nothing for a player like Tyler Davis. So I am buying the hype. And listen, when Brian Gutekunst talks about you unannounced, when Matt LaFleur talks about you unannounced, when Matt LaFleur talks about how Rich Bisaccia has talked about him unannounced, there is smoke and fire at that point. So very excited about what Tyler Davis can bring. I don't know what level he reaches this season. Could just be rotational tight end. That's fine. I still think he's going to be a 53-man roster player and have some impact on the Packers this season. Number 3 is Razul Douglas. And, these are always the age-old questions, right? Of like, you have a player who doesn't do anything for the first few years of his career, is bouncing around teams, doesn't really do much of anything, and then all of a sudden, something clicks. And he goes on to have a fantastic 2021 campaign with the Green Bay Packers. But ultimately, you look at it, and it's like 12 weeks, something like that. So the question is, who's the real Razul Douglas? Is it the guy that bounced around the league and really, was basically nothing through the first few years of his career? Or was it the 12 weeks in 2021 with the Packers? Is that the real Razul Douglas? And just from what I've seen so far, I believe that we're going to see much more of the 2021 Razul Douglas. I think he's going to continue over the momentum from what he gained a season ago. I think he's going to be a real legitimate solid corner for this Packers defense. I think he's going to play a lot in the slot. I think he's going to play outside, but you can just see the IQ and intelligence that Razul Douglas have. I think that's why it's going to lend himself so well to being that slot corner, especially on early downs. But I think the playmaking is going to continue. I think he's just going to continue to grow within this Joe Barry defense. Remember, it's not easy to get picked up midseason and learn a new defense and go out and play it. I think the fact that he has, 12 plus games in his defense a season ago, and then had the opportunity to, kind of redigest everything in the offseason, I think he's going to be that much farther ahead. So really, really excited about Razul Douglas. I do not think last year is going to be a fluke, and I do believe the hype that Razul Douglas, the 2021 Razul Douglas, is the real Razul Douglas, and that's going to continue in 2022. Number 4 on my list is Kway Walker. I know there was the recent article about him, maybe struggling with a little bit of confidence as he's learning something new. Listen, that is young 20s rookie experience in the NFL. That's not anything to be concerned about when you're in a new spot with a new team, with a new G on your helmet, and you're trying to get a PhD in Joe Barry's defense when you're just getting into the NFL. Yeah, it's really tough for any of these rookies to have any level of confidence at this point because there's just a lot that goes into it, right? So all of that being said, no concerns about his confidence. One, I think he is in the perfect situation because, you're an early, you're middle first round pick, and you come from Georgia where you weren't the guy. There were so many other players on that team. Now you're coming in and expectations are high. I love the fact that you have a veteran and an all-pro in Devondre Campbell ahead of you to learn from. We've already seen that him and Campbell have made a connection, that Walker and Campbell have made a connection, that he's learning from Campbell. Campbell's teaching Walker. I think that is going to be huge. But I also think that even just having a Chris Barnes there, right? Somebody that is... Chris Barnes was an undrafted free agent that made himself into a starter. He is not going to give that spot up without a fight. Barnes has fought for everything to get to this point, right? And yes, Kway Walker is a first-round pick, but Barnes is going to fight tooth and nail to earn, maybe it's not the starting role, right? Maybe it's not the number 2 linebacker, but earn everything he can to still find a spot on the field and actually getting defensive snaps. I love that for Kway Walker. He has legit competition right off the bat because you know Barnes isn't going to quit. And 2, even if Barnes does play maybe some more base defense, which allows Kway Walker to play more nickel or, obvious pass down defense, or be used in some sub packages. If that's the way that Walker starts off, I think that's fantastic. I think sometimes you can overload these rookies with a bit too much and get paralysis by analysis. If Walker has a handful of very specific roles in nickel and dime defense, fantastic. I think there's legitimate opportunity for him to excel there. Maybe you put him on some special teams as well. But the fact that you have an all-pro ahead of him, the fact that you have a former undrafted guy who's going to push with everything he has to keep some of those snaps away from Kway Walker, I think that iron sharpening iron is going to really, focus Kway Walker. But already we have seen some real flash plays from Kway Walker. This is a player that absolutely looks the part from day one. The first time that you see him, he moves incredibly well. You've seen him make really smart plays, especially in the screen game. You see him very active. You see him use that sideline to sideline speed. I think he's going to make a real impact from day one, and I am buying the hype on Kway Walker. And last but not least, the 5th Packer that I'm buying the hype on this offseason is Rashawn Gary. This is what I would consider a ceiling check for Rashawn Gary. He's already really, really, really good and a fantastic edge rusher. He sets the edge well. He hustles. He's going to get to the quarterback. We know that already. We don't need to know much more from that side of things, right? There's no way you can put all of the could he be a bust things to that's gone. We already know he's going to be really good. He's going to be Green Bay's edge rusher 1. Now the question is, how high does that ceiling go? And this is probably the season. I'm not going to limit it and say it couldn't happen next year or a year from now, but this is probably the season where we get the ceiling check. Meaning, was last year peak Rashawn Gary, or is there another level that he can still take himself to? Can he become one of the top 5, top 3 edge rushers in all of football? Can he get to that TJ Watt sort of level? Can he become a just monster disruptor that offenses have to be aware of at all times? Can he become a first team all-pro player? I think he can. This is not to say I think Rashawn Gary is a first-team All-Pro all day, all night, and you're going to see him just explode into another upper echelon of players. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I do believe the hype that there is still more there for Rashawn Gary, and I do think he's going to take another step forward. Whether that just means Pro Bowl player, whether that means jumping into All-Pro conversation, whether that's just dominant edge rusher who cares about the accolades, down in and down out, I'm not sure exactly what that is yet. But I am buying the Rashawn Gary hype, and I think he's going to be even better than he was a season ago, which is a scary thought for the NFC North and opposing Packer offenses. So we shall see exactly what ceiling he can get to, but I am so excited to see what he can do in this defense this upcoming season because, as I mentioned, I believe there is a whole nother step for Gary to take, which is a very exciting thought for Packer fans. So to recap, my 5 guys that as of today, I am buying the hype on: TJ Slayton, Tyler Davis, Razul Douglas, Kway Walker, and Rashawn Gary. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.